In the heart of Amaigbo, a village burdened by fear and the shadow of a tyrant, Afamefuna, the son of the dreaded Chief Ogbunka, carries the weight of a dark legacy. Bound by shame and scorned by his father's sins, Afamefuna seeks to break free from the curse of his lineage. But in a world where destiny is shaped by blood and tradition, can one man truly rewrite the past? This is the story of a son who dared to confront his father's evil, and the land that called him to restore what was broken. Please subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications bell. Don't forget to hit the like button and share with your family and friends. The cock crowed thrice over the red earth of Amaigbo, yet the village square was silent. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of fear. Children whispered to one another in hushed tones, women avoided certain paths when going to the stream, and men lowered their voices even in their own compounds. At the center of this suffocating quiet stood a name, a shadow, a terror, Chief Ogbunka. Ogbunka was not born evil. The elders said he had once been like any other young man of the village, full of energy, laughter, and hunger for wealth. But as he grew, envy lodged deep in his heart. When his peers prospered, he frowned. When another man's farm yielded more than his, he sought diabolic means to ruin it. By middle age, he had become a tyrant, a man who combined wealth with wickedness, and fear with power. Every gathering in Amaigbo bore his mark. At market days, sellers stopped mid-conversation when he approached, as though their tongues could turn to stone if he heard a word he disliked. At family meetings, nobody dared challenge his decisions. To cross him was to invite death. A young man once disagreed openly with Ogbunka about boundary land. The next morning, his lifeless body was found hanging from an iroko tree. The whispers spread quickly, "It is Ogbunka." It became a chant of terror. The weight on Afamefuna. For Ogbunka, life was a battlefield of envy and control. For his eldest son, Afamefuna, life was a prison of shame. From childhood, Afamefuna carried the weight of his father's sins. At age 10, his playmates began mocking him. "Son of the killer." They jeered when he joined in wrestling at the village square. If he won a game, they whispered that his father must have used juju to give him strength. If he lost, they laughed louder, saying it was the curse of his father's evil. At night, Afamefuna would lie awake, staring at the thatched roof, wondering why fate had tied him to a man he did not admire. His mother tried to console him. "My son, you are different. Do not let your father's path be yours." But her words were like oil poured into a raging fire, too little to quench it. By the time Afamefuna turned 15, he had become withdrawn, rarely joining age mates in moonlight plays. He carried his shame like a cloak. His siblings too bore the brunt. His sisters were shunned in marriage talks because no family wanted their daughters to become in-laws to Ogbunka. His younger brother, Obum, got into frequent fights because of insults hurled at their family. One evening, Afamefuna gathered courage and went to his father. He stood before the man whose presence made even elders tremble. "Papa," he said, voice shaking, "must you continue this way? The villagers hate us. We live in shame. Please, desist from these evil acts." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Ogbunka's eyes glowed with cold fire. "Afamefuna, who are you to advise me? I am the lion of Amaigbo. I am the one who decides who lives and who dies. If you ever open your mouth again to speak such foolishness, you will regret being my son." Afamefuna left that compound with tears burning his cheeks. It was the day he realized he could never change his father. The growing fear in Amaigbo. Year after year, Ogbunka's wickedness deepened. He ensured no man prospered above him. If a young trader in Amaigbo returned from Lagos with wealth, Ogbunka's charms would ruin him within weeks. If a girl in the village caught the eye of suitors before his daughters, he would strike her with illness until she withered. Parents, fearing for their children, began sneaking them out at night to live in faraway cities. Those who remained grew up in constant dread. Even the titled elders found themselves helpless, for Ogbunka's influence stretched into the shrine and the oracle priests who feared him. Afamefuna, meanwhile, carried the insult like a scar. At every turn, his father's shadow blocked the light of his destiny. A silent decision. By the time Afamefuna turned 17, his heart had hardened with resolve. He knew he could not continue to bear the shame of being Ogbunka's son. One afternoon, while working on the family farm, his closest friend, Obadike, approached him. Obadike's parents had secretly moved two of his elder brothers to Port Harcourt to escape Ogbunka's tyranny. Afamefuna, Obadike said, glancing around to be sure no one was listening, "You are wasting here. Leave this village. Go to the city. Find your own path. If you remain, your father's evil will swallow you." That night, Afamefuna packed a small bundle of clothes, a few tubers of yam, and the little money his mother secretly pressed into his hand with trembling fingers. "May the gods protect you, my son," she whispered, her eyes wet with sorrow. "Do not forget who you are. You are not your father. Go and find your destiny." With the moon guiding his path, Afamefuna slipped away from Amaigbo, leaving behind the fear of Ogbunka, the shame of his lineage, and the uncertain weight of his future. As he walked into the darkness of the unknown, one thought burned in his heart. "I will not be my father's shadow. I will write my own story." And so began the journey of the boy who would one day be called by the gods of the land. The first time Afamefuna set foot in the city, he was overwhelmed. Port Harcourt was nothing like Amaigbo. The roar of buses, the cries of hawkers, the endless stream of people moving like waves on the streets, everything pressed on him at once. His little bundle of clothes felt lighter than the weight of loneliness on his shoulders. For the first time in his life, he had no family to run to, no mother's arms, no familiar voices of villagers, even if those voices mocked him. He was completely on his own. At first, he stayed with Obadike's cousin, a thin man with sharp eyes and a wary smile. But within weeks, the cousin grew tired of having an extra mouth to feed. One night, he threw Afamfuna's bundle outside the door and said coldly, "You are old enough. Hustle like the rest of us." So, Afamefuna slept on verandas and bus stops, his belly empty, his heart heavy. Oil bunkering, the near-death escape. Desperation pushed him into his first work, oil bunkering. A group of boys from the Niger Delta took him in. They were rough, always armed with knives, their eyes bloodshot from drugs. "You want money?" they asked him. "Follow us." At night, they crept to the creeks, siphoning oil from pipelines. The work was dangerous, the pay small, but for a while, Afamefuna endured. His hands were black with oil, his lungs choked with fumes, but he told himself it was better than hunger. Then came the night of the raid. Police stormed the creeks, guns firing, boots splashing in the water. The boys scattered like rats. Afamefuna ran until his chest nearly burst, bullets whizzing past his ears. He leapt into the river and swam blindly, the water choking his nostrils. When he finally dragged himself to the shore, coughing and trembling, he lay there and whispered, "If I had died tonight, would my father even care?" The thought cut him deeper than the bullets that missed him. The next morning, he swore never to return to the creeks again. The endless failures. From oil bunkering, Afamefuna tried trading. He scraped together small money to buy goods, but thieves stole them on his first journey. He tried shoe shining, customers mocked his trembling hands. He carried loads at markets, but bigger boys bullied him out of the trade. Each attempt ended the same way, failure. His friends seemed to prosper while he stumbled. "Afamefuna," one of them teased, "maybe the gods of your father's victims are following you." The words pierced him. He began to believe that his father's evil shadow stretched even into the city, poisoning his path. The importation business. Hope flickered when some friends invited him to join in importing goods from the north. They traveled together, bringing back cattle, grains, and textiles. His friends made huge profits. But Afamefuna? His cattle died mysteriously on the way. His grains rotted faster than expected. His textiles were rejected as fake. By the end of each trip, he returned with almost nothing. He watched in envy as his companions built small houses, married, and started families. Meanwhile, he remained a wanderer, eating from roadside vendors, sleeping in rented corners, his clothes faded and his spirit dim. The weight of depression. By the time he turned 25, Afamefuna was weary. The city had given him nothing but hunger, mockery, and scars. Sometimes, when night fell and he curled up in a dark corner of a mechanic's workshop where he was allowed to sleep, he wished he had never left Amaigbo. But then he would remember the faces of the children who once mocked him, the shame of his father's sins, and the cold warning in Ogbunka's eyes, "You will regret being my son." And so, even in despair, he whispered to himself, "I must not go back empty-handed. I must prove I am not my father." Yet the depression deepened. His laughter became rare. He walked the streets with hollow eyes. At times, he thought of ending his life, to silence the mockery forever. But something always held him back, an invisible hand, a faint whisper inside his soul telling him his story was not finished. The encounter at the crossroads. It was during one of these dark days that Afamfuna's life took a turn. He had just lost money in another failed business attempt. With nothing left in his pocket, he wandered aimlessly, his head heavy with hopelessness. He found himself standing at a deserted crossroad in the city, staring at the ground as tears blurred his vision. There, an old man in a white garment appeared, holding a Bible in one hand and a staff in the other. His beard was long, his eyes bright like fire. He looked directly at Afamefuna as though he had been waiting for him all along. "Young man," the old man said, his voice deep, "why do you wander like a leaf blown by the wind?" Afamefuna froze. Who are you?" The old man smiled faintly. "I am a messenger. And you, son of Ogbunka, are carrying a burden heavier than your own sins. You will not prosper until you answer the call of the land, the call of your bloodline, the call of the gods." Afamefuna staggered backward. "My father's evil has cursed me." "No," the old man shook his head. "Your father chose darkness. But you have been chosen for light. Until you return to your roots, until you embrace the call of nature, nothing in your hand will yield fruit." Then, as suddenly as he appeared, the old man turned and walked away, disappearing into the bustling streets, leaving Afamefuna trembling at the crossroad. For the first time in years, his heart thumped with something new, a strange mixture of fear and hope. Could it be true? Could he really be called by the gods of the land? That night, Afamefuna could not sleep. The old man's words replayed in his head like a drumbeat. He was torn between doubt and belief, between shame and destiny. But one thing was certain, his life of struggle had reached a turning point. The city had tried and tested him, but now a new chapter was calling. A chapter written not by men, but by the unseen hands of the gods. And whether he was ready or not, Afamefuna was about to step into it. Afamefuna never forgot the day the white garment man stopped him at the crossroad. The words echoed in his mind, haunting him even as he tried to push them away. "You will not prosper until you answer the call of the land, the call of your bloodline, the call of the gods." For nights he tossed and turned, unable to rest. Was it madness? Or could it be true? His friends noticed the change in him. He became quieter, often staring into space during conversations. "Afamefuna, what's wrong with you?" one asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. Just tired." But inside, he was wrestling with a storm. The first visit to the White Garment Church. 2 weeks later, curiosity overcame him. He followed the faint sound of drums and clapping to a small building painted white, its walls marked with crosses in blue. At the door, barefoot men and women dressed in flowing white gowns welcomed him. "You are welcome, brother," one said. He stepped inside, and immediately the smell of burning candles and incense filled his nostrils. The congregation swayed, singing songs that rose like waves, accompanied by the sharp ringing of bells. In the midst of the singing, the prophet appeared. It was the same old man who had stopped him at the crossroads. His eyes glowed with recognition when they fell on Afamefuna. "You have come," he said. The service that followed was unlike anything Afamefuna had ever seen. People cried, some rolled on the floor, others shouted in strange tongues. Afamefuna stood awkwardly, his heart beating fast. At the end, the prophet placed a hand on his head. "You are chosen. You carry fire in your blood. But beware, your destiny does not lie only here. The call is deeper." Afamefuna left the church shaken. He felt something stir inside him, but also a nagging emptiness. The struggle of faith. For months, Afamefuna kept attending the White Garment Church. He fasted, prayed, sang, and sought deliverance. He hoped that maybe this would finally break the chain of failure in his life. But his situation did not change. His small business efforts still failed. His friends still mocked him. Each time he counted his money, it slipped away faster than water through a sieve. One night after service, Afamefuna confronted the prophet. "Man of God," he said bitterly, "you said I am chosen. Then why is nothing changing? Why do I still suffer?" The prophet's eyes softened. "Because, my son, you are standing between two rivers. One is the river of this ministry. The other is the river of your ancestors. Until you know which one to drink from, your thirst will remain." Afamefuna clenched his fists. "So what must I do?" The prophet only shook his head. "Pray. Seek. The path will show itself." The dreams. That very week, the dreams began. Night after night, Afamefuna saw visions. He was standing in a thick forest, surrounded by ancient trees. Drums echoed in the distance, and strange voices called his name. Afamefuna. Afamefuna. Sometimes he saw masked dancers, spirits of the land, circling him. Other times, he stood before a river where a woman clothed in white beads offered him a calabash. When he woke, sweat drenched his body. He told no one, but the dreams shook him deeply. He could no longer deny it, something greater than himself was pulling at his soul. The inner conflict. Afamefuna was torn. He had been raised in a community where the gods of the land held sway. Yet the city preached of churches and salvation in Christ. One path demanded ancestral obedience, the other promised heavenly reward. He asked himself again and again, which way is mine? One Sunday morning, while sitting in the church, he watched as people danced and clapped. But his mind was elsewhere. He thought of his father, Ogbunka, and how he had misused the power of the gods for evil. What if I become like him? He wondered. What if I fall into the same darkness? His heart pounded with fear. He ran out of the church that day, unable to stay. The turning point. That night, he dreamt again. This time, the forest was darker than before, the drums louder. He saw his father, old and cruel, standing in chains. Then, out of the shadows, an elder with a staff approached Afamefuna. His eyes burned like fire. "You fear becoming your father," the elder said. "But listen well, the gods do not call you to repeat his evil. They call you to cleanse it. Where your father sowed poison, you will sow healing. Where he spread fear, you will restore dignity. Accept your call, and your life will flourish." When Afamefuna awoke, tears streamed down his face. For the first time, the fear of his father's shadow lifted from his chest. He knew then what he had to do. The acceptance. The next day, Afamefuna stopped attending the White Garment Church. He thanked the prophet for guiding him, but he explained, "The gods of the land are calling me. I must answer them, or my life will remain in chains." The prophet looked at him long and hard, then nodded slowly. "Go, my son. Your path is not here. It is written already. From that day, Afamefuna began preparing himself. He studied the traditions of his people, asked questions from elders in the city, and performed small rites of cleansing. For the first time in his adult life, he began to see little signs of breakthrough. His business deals no longer collapsed instantly, and his heart carried peace instead of torment. By the time he turned 31, he had married a woman from the city who believed in his destiny. Together, they built a modest home. For once, Afamefuna felt the weight of shame begin to lift from his shoulders. But in the depth of his spirit, he knew one truth. This was only the beginning. For the gods of the land were not calling him to remain in the city. They were calling him back to Amaigbo, back to the land of his father, the land poisoned by Ogbunka's evil. And sooner or later, he would have to answer fully. When Afamefuna turned 31, his life began to take a different shape. For years he had battled disappointment, betrayal, and failure, yet once he accepted the call of the land, even in small steps, something shifted. It was as though invisible chains had broken from his neck. The first breakthroughs. His small trading business, which had always struggled, suddenly began to flourish. At first, he thought it was luck, but as weeks turned into months, he noticed a pattern. Whenever he honored his ancestors with libations, his dealings prospered. If he neglected the rituals, misfortune returned. One day, while counting his earnings from a recent trip to the northern markets, he was overwhelmed with emotion. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "So this is what it feels like to succeed." For the first time, he could buy himself proper clothes, pay his rent without fear, and even help friends who were in need. The man once mocked as cursed now carried a dignity that was impossible to ignore. Love in the city. It was during this season that Afamefuna met Chioma. She was a teacher in a nearby school, gentle in spirit, strong in character, and graceful in her speech. Their first meeting was not grand. She had come to buy foodstuffs at the same stall where Afamefuna was selling imported rice. "Brother, how much for this measure?" she asked. When Afamefuna lifted his head to reply, their eyes met. Something clicked. He answered her politely, but after she left, he could not shake the memory of her voice. Weeks later, fate brought them together again at a wedding. This time, conversation flowed easily. Chioma's laughter, sincere and musical, filled Afamfuna's heart with warmth. They became friends, then companions. Chioma was different from other women Afamefuna had known. She did not care about his wealth, or lack of it, but she admired his determination and honesty. She listened when he spoke about his struggles, and instead of mocking him, she encouraged him. One evening, as they walked back from church, Chioma said softly, "Afamefuna, you carry a heavy destiny. I can see it in your eyes. Whatever it is, I will stand by you." Her words pierced his heart like an arrow. From that day, he knew she was the woman he wanted beside him. Marriage and stability. At 31, Afamefuna married Chioma in a modest but joyous ceremony. Friends and relatives from both sides attended. For Afamefuna, the wedding was not just about love, it was about redemption. All his life, he had been judged by the shadow of his father, Ogbunka. But as he held Chioma's hand and said his vows, he felt reborn. It was proof that he was not destined to repeat his father's cruelty. Marriage brought stability. Chioma's wise counsel guided him whenever fear crept into his heart. Her prayers in the mornings and her soft songs at night gave him peace. They lived simply, but happily, in a rented house in the city. 2 years later, their first child was born, a boy they named Chukwudubum, meaning, God is merciful. Holding his son in his arms for the first time, Afamefuna broke down in tears. "Mercy, indeed," he whispered. From a rejected son of a wicked man to a father holding his own blessing. Later, 2 daughters followed, Ifyananya and Amarachi. The sound of their laughter filled the home with life. Afamefuna often sat watching them play, marveling at how much joy had entered his world. The unfinished business. But despite these blessings, there was a restlessness that never left Afamefuna. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he would dream of Amaigbo. He saw the ancient trees of his homeland, the village square where his father once terrorized the people, the streams that carried secrets of generations. He heard voices again, calling. Afamefuna. Come home. Your work is not finished here in the city. The land waits. He would wake up drenched in sweat, staring at Chioma sleeping peacefully beside him. The more he prospered in the city, the louder the call became. It was as if the gods were saying, "You cannot heal what is broken from afar. You must return." Fear of his father's shadow. But fear held him back. Though old and crippled, Ogbunka was still alive. His father's name continued to strike terror in Amaigbo. People whispered of the families he had ruined, the blood sacrifices he had made, the curses he had pronounced. Afamefuna remembered how, as a child, he had begged his father to change his ways, only to be silenced with insults. That memory haunted him. What if they hate me because of him? He wondered. What if they never forgive me for being his son? The shame of his father's evil weighed heavily on him. Even in the city, when people discovered who his father was, their smiles would fade, and distance would form between them. The encouragement of Chioma. One evening, Afamefuna sat brooding outside his house. Chioma noticed and joined him. "You are troubled again," she said softly. Afamefuna sighed. "The gods are calling me back to Amaigbo. But you know what my father did. That land carries his curses. Will they even accept me?" Chioma touched his hand gently. "Afamefuna, listen to me. A tree does not choose the soil where it is planted, but it can choose whether to bear good fruit or bad. You are not your father. If the land calls you, it is because you are the one meant to cleanse it." Her words struck him deeply. That night, he prayed, not to escape his destiny, but for the courage to embrace it. A new strength. Slowly, Afamefuna began to prepare. He started learning more about the traditions of Amaigbo, the rituals of cleansing, the festivals, the sacred groves. He sought out elderly men from his community who lived in the city, asking questions about history and culture. At first, they were hesitant to speak to him, knowing whose son he was. But when they saw his humility, some of them softened. "You are not like Ogbunka," one old man told him. "If you are serious about restoration, the land will honor you." This gave Afamefuna strength. The silent waiting. By the time he was 37, Afamefuna had built a small but thriving life in the city. He had a wife who believed in him, children who adored him, and enough stability to be respected. Yet, the call of Amaigbo grew louder with each passing year. It was no longer just in dreams. Sometimes, while walking alone, he would hear drums faintly in his ears. Other times, a sudden breeze would brush against his face, carrying the smell of the red earth of his village. He knew he could not resist forever. The gods of the land had been patient. But sooner or later, they would demand his full obedience. And when that day came, Afamefuna would have to return to Amaigbo, face his father's legacy, and decide whether he was strong enough to rewrite it. At 37, Afamefuna could no longer ignore the pull of his bloodline. The city had given him blessings, but his spirit was restless. His dreams had grown stronger, visions of his ancestors' voices calling him, the land itself beckoning like a mother who had lost her child. One night, the vision came more clearly than ever. Afamefuna stood in the sacred forest of Amaigbo. The trees whispered. A deep, thunderous voice said, "Son of the land, your feet do not belong here in the city. Return. Heal what your father wounded. Restore what was broken. Until you return, the land remains in chains." When he awoke, he knew it was time. Breaking the news to Chioma. At dawn, Afamefuna sat on the veranda, staring into the pale morning sky. Chioma joined him, carrying a cup of warm tea. She studied his face and knew something was weighing on him. Chioma, he began, his voice low, the time has come. I must return to Amaigbo. Her eyes softened, though her hands trembled slightly. She had always known this day would come. Are you ready for what awaits you there? The people may not forget your father's deeds easily. I know, Afamefuna admitted, his voice heavy. But if I remain here, I will live like a man who runs from his shadow. The gods will not allow me rest. Chioma placed her hand on his. Then we will go together. Whatever they say, whatever they do, we will face it as one. Afamfuna's chest tightened with gratitude. His wife was not only his partner, she was his shield. The journey back. When the family packed their belongings and set out for Amaigbo, Afamfuna's heart pounded like the beating of ancestral drums. The red soil road stretched before them, lined with palm trees swaying in the wind. Every mile carried him closer to the land he once fled as a boy. Memories returned, the mockery of his peers, the shame of being Ogbunka's son, the day he left at 17, vowing never to look back. But here he was, 20 years later, not as a boy escaping shame, but as a man answering destiny. The first encounter. The moment Afamefuna stepped into Amaigbo, whispers filled the air. Look, that is Ogbunka's son. After so many years, he dares to return. Has he come to finish his father's wickedness? Mothers pulled their children away. Men narrowed their eyes suspiciously. Elders shook their heads, uncertain. Afamefuna felt the sting of their rejection, but he kept his head high. He was no longer the timid boy who once carried shame on his shoulders. He had come to stand, not to hide. Facing the elders. 3 days after his arrival, Afamefuna requested a meeting with the council of elders at the village square. When he arrived, the square was full. Old men with gray beards sat on carved stools, their walking sticks by their side. Younger men stood behind them, arms crossed. Even women gathered in the distance, curious to hear what the son of Ogbunka had to say. The atmosphere was heavy. Everyone expected arrogance, the same kind of cruelty Ogbunka had displayed. But when Afamefuna stepped forward, he did something no one expected. He knelt. Fathers, mothers, elders of Amaigbo, he began, his voice steady but humble, I come not to continue the evil of my father. I come to repent for it, though his blood runs in my veins. I come to stand before you as a son of this land, not as the son of Ogbunka, but as Afamefuna, the one who must restore what was broken. The square fell silent. Birds chirped in the distance. A soft breeze rustled the leaves. One elder, Ens Okari, stood up slowly, leaning on his staff. Do you know the weight of what you speak, young man? Your father destroyed lives. He brought fear, he shed blood, he turned brothers into enemies. How do you think mere words can erase such evil? Afamefuna raised his head, tears shining in his eyes. I do not ask you to forget. I ask for a chance to heal. The gods themselves have called me. If I fail, let them judge me. But if I succeed, let Amaigbo know peace again. The murmurs grew louder. Some elders whispered in agreement, others shook their heads in doubt. Finally, another elder, Mama Nena, the oldest woman in the community, spoke. Her voice was cracked with age, yet filled with authority. I see truth in his eyes, she said. Let us not judge him by his father's shadow. If the land calls him, then the land will prove it. Give him a chance. The test of acceptance. The elders agreed to test Afamefuna. If the gods truly sent you, Ens Okari declared, then let them show it. Tomorrow, we will take you to the sacred grove. There you will offer sacrifice and call upon the spirits. If they answer, we will believe you. If they do not, leave this land and never return. The villagers gasped. The sacred grove was not a place of games. Many who entered without purity never returned alive. Chioma clutched Afamfuna's arm that night, fear in her eyes. Afam, are you sure of this? What if they reject you? What if something goes wrong? Afamefuna held her close. If I run from this, I will never know peace. The gods that have followed me since childhood will not abandon me now. The night before. That night, Afamefuna could not sleep. He went outside, knelt on the earth, and poured libation. Ancestors of Amaigbo, hear me, he whispered. I am not Ogbunka. I am Afamefuna. I do not come to oppress, but to heal. If truly I am chosen, stand with me tomorrow. Do not let me be put to shame before my people. The wind stirred. The moon shone brighter. Afamefuna felt a strange calm settle over him. For the first time in days, he smiled. The sacred grove. The next morning, the entire village gathered at the entrance of the sacred grove. Elders led the way, carrying staffs and colonnuts. Drummers beat slowly, their rhythm heavy with anticipation. Afamefuna walked barefoot, his heart pounding like thunder. He carried a white goat for sacrifice, its bleating echoing through the trees. When they reached the altar in the grove, the elders gestured for him to step forward. Afamefuna placed the goat on the ground, lifted his hands to the sky, and spoke with a voice that shook even him. Spirits of Amaigbo, ancestors of our fathers, hear me. I stand not as the son of Ogbunka, but as your servant. If it is your will that I heal this land, show your sign today. The moment he spoke, the air changed. The trees swayed violently though no wind blew. The drums beat faster on their own, though no hand touched them. Thunder rolled in the sky, though it was clear and sunny. The villagers gasped, some falling to their knees. Then, the goat lay down calmly and closed its eyes, dying without struggle, a sign of total acceptance by the spirits. Okuri's staff fell from his hand. His eyes widened. The land has spoken, he whispered. The gods have accepted him. The crowd erupted in awe. Some wept, others clapped. Even those who doubted bowed their heads in respect. The new beginning. From that day, Afamefuna was no longer seen as Ogbunka's son. He was seen as the chosen one, the man called to restore Amaigbo. The elders blessed him publicly, laying hands on him and declaring, from today, you are not the curse of this land, you are its healer. As Afamefuna walked back home, Chioma by his side, he felt lighter than he had in his entire life. The shame of his father's evil was finally broken. But deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. To heal Amaigbo, he would have to confront more than fear and suspicion. He would have to uproot generations of darkness, battle unseen forces, and prove, again and again, that he was truly chosen. The journey of restoration had just begun. The events at the sacred grove marked the beginning of a new dawn for Amaigbo. The villagers, who once looked at Afamefuna with suspicion, now greeted him with respect. Children who used to whisper behind his back now ran to him, calling him Uncle Afam. The same mothers who once dragged their children away from him now blessed him openly, saying, "May you live long, son of the land." But with honor came responsibility. Afamefuna knew that the gods had not called him for praise, but for service. The true work of restoration had only just begun. The weight of leadership. The elders of Amaigbo, impressed by his humility and courage, gathered in council and made a historic decision: Afamefuna would serve as president of the town union. Not because you seek power, Okuri said, but because power itself has chosen you. Where your father ruled with fear, you must lead with love. Afamefuna accepted, though fear lingered in his chest. Leadership in Amaigbo was no simple task. Centuries of traditions, broken trust, and the wounds of Ogbunka's cruelty weighed on the land. Could he carry such a burden? That night, Chioma held him close and whispered, "You were chosen for this. If you were strong enough to stand before the spirits, you are strong enough to stand before men." Her faith fueled his courage. Healing the people. Word spread quickly that Afamefuna carried the favor of the gods. Soon, villagers began to approach him with their burdens. A woman whose daughter had been mute for 5 years came, weeping. Afamefuna prayed and poured libation at the shrine, invoking the ancestors for mercy. Within a week, the girl spoke her first words. A man who had been imprisoned in his dreams by night terrors sought help. Afamefuna performed cleansing rituals, and the man slept peacefully for the first time in a decade. Even barren couples came, and many later rejoiced with children. The people marveled. Where Ogbunka sowed fear, Afamefuna sows healing. Where Ogbunka cursed, Afamefuna blesses. Bit by bit, the shame of his father's name began to fade, replaced by the honor of Afamfuna's deeds. The return of farming. One of Afamfuna's greatest visions was to restore the dignity of Amaigbo through farming. For years, fear and curses had driven people away from the farmlands, leaving the soil barren. But Afamefuna believed the land itself could be healed. He organized a great festival, calling farmers to return. Before they began planting, he led them in a cleansing ritual, pouring palm wine and kola nuts on the earth. O gods of our fathers, bless this soil again. Let it yield fruit for the hands of the just. Let Amaigbo never hunger again. That year, the harvest was unlike any the village had seen in decades. Yams grew larger than a man's arm, cassava stretched long, and palm fruit overflowed. Joy filled the land. Amaigbo, once mocked by neighboring towns, became a center of prosperity. Traders came from far and wide to buy their produce. The dignity of the land had returned. The fall of Ogbunka. But as the land flourished, one figure remained in darkness, Chief Ogbunka. By now, the once feared man was a shell of his former self. He had been blind, crippled, and bedridden for over 20 years. Flies buzzed around his mat, and his voice had grown hoarse. Servants who once trembled before him now barely listened. When news of Afamfuna's rise reached his ears, bitterness filled his heart. My son. Leading Amaigbo? Ha! They will never forget Ogbunka. Never. He spat. But the truth was, the people had already begun to forget him. His name was now spoken only in whispers of warning. One fateful night, Ogbunka cried out in his sleep, tormented by visions. He saw the spirits of those he had wronged, families he had destroyed, children he had cursed, men whose lives he had cut short. They circled him, chanting. You sowed fear. You drank blood. Now your time is done. He woke screaming, sweat pouring down his face. His body shook violently. For days he refused to eat, muttering to himself, cursing the gods, cursing even Afamefuna. Finally, at the age of 98, Ogbunka breathed his last. The elders of Amaigbo gathered. After long deliberation, they declared, a man who lived by evil cannot be buried among the righteous. Let Ogbunka be cast into the evil forest. And so it was. Without ceremony, without honor, Ogbunka's body was carried into the dreaded evil forest, where only outcasts were laid to rest. Birds cawed ominously as the men returned, leaving him there to rot. For the first time in generations, Amaigbo felt truly free. The vindication of Afamefuna. When word spread that Ogbunka had died, many expected Afamefuna to mourn publicly. But instead, he gathered the villagers in the square. Do not remember my father for his evil, he said. Remember that even the mightiest tyrant falls. But also remember this, no man's shadow can curse you forever. If I, Ogbunka's son, can rise, then Amaigbo can rise. Our shame is gone. The people roared in agreement, clapping and singing his name. Tears flowed freely. For them, Afamfuna's rise was more than personal, it was proof that their land had been delivered. Restoration fulfilled. In the years that followed, Afamfuna's influence grew. He remained humble, always reminding the people that it was not his power but the God's grace that restored Amaigbo. Schools were built for the children. Markets thrived with new traders. The once deserted farmlands became fertile grounds of abundance. Neighboring villages who once mocked Amaigbo now sought its friendship. But more importantly, the spiritual dignity of the community was restored. Families who once lived under curses now lifted their heads proudly. Festivals once cancelled out of fear were celebrated again with drumming, dancing, and masquerades. Afamefuna himself continued to serve as both town leader and spiritual vessel. He healed the sick, counseled the troubled, and taught the young never to repeat the mistakes of the past. His children grew under his guidance, carrying both modern education and respect for tradition. Chioma, his faithful wife, became known as the Mother of Amaigbo for her wisdom and compassion. Legacy of a son. On his 50th birthday, Afamefuna stood once again in the village square where he had once knelt in shame. This time, he stood tall as drums beat and dancers performed in his honor. He looked around at the crowd, children laughing, farmers boasting of their harvest, elders smiling with pride. His heart swelled with gratitude. In his speech, he said, "All my life, I feared my father's shadow. But today I know, shadows cannot kill the light. The gods chose me not to erase the past, but to heal it. If ever you doubt yourselves, remember my story. From shame came honor. From mockery came glory. From Ogbunka came Afamefuna, and through him, Amaigbo rose again." The crowd erupted in song, chanting his name until the night sky echoed with celebration. Afamefuna smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. He had been called by the gods of the land, and he had answered. And because of that, Amaigbo would never be the same again. Epilogue: The End of Shame. Years later, when Afamfuna's own time came, he was not buried in secrecy like his father. Instead, the entire Amaigbo gathered to honor him. Elders declared, "He was the son of a wicked man, but he lived as the son of the land. Through him, the gods restored us. Let his name never be forgotten." They buried him not in the evil forest, but at the heart of the village, under the great Irako tree, so his memory would live with the people forever. And so, Afamfuna's legacy became a tale for generations, a story of pain turned to healing, shame turned to glory, and how a son, though born in the shadow of evil, answered the call of the gods and restored the dignity of his land. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please share your thoughts in the comment box. We would love to read them. Please subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications bell. Don't forget to hit the like button and share with your family and friends. Thank you so much for watching.